So Teranga is a Senegalese word that means welcome. So our goal is any person from any nationality who has entrepreneur spirit, not only like opening a company, but want to manage his life, let's say. We will give the tools, we will give the professional speakers who will come and talk about any subject that you choose. So we always do events out of your feedback, so you are very welcome to tell us more and what you want to hear about for the next session. Thank you. Maybe Mac, you want to say something?
I just want to say that I want to fall asleep, but since Dennis is here, yeah, so my name is Mac and I'm from Senegal as well. I've been living here for like 8 years and running my own tech startup here as well. So let's just start at a valley where at least everybody can feel comfortable exposing their ideas, sharing things, and since then, we've been quite active in terms of, finding people like you that I'm looking so forward to hearing from, and also other people, and then it's really amazing because I realize that when people come here, when they walk out, they just take so much out of it, right? It's when it comes to whether you haven't started anything in your life, at least something could spark that little, okay, I'm gonna go do something, or you're at a very late stage in your entrepreneurial venture. So yeah, that's what we're really trying to do. We had how many people do we have in the group right now? About 100. So yeah, we just have people come in and learning, and yeah, so I'm very happy to have you today.
What am I doing? So I'm doing two main things today. So the first one is I work in Tmall Global. Okay, so I'll give you very hard stuff to look at. So Tmall Global on top. So the regions I cover today are Europe and Israel. Okay, my responsibilities today are to increase the import of products from Europe, but I oversee certain categories like health supplements, food, home, and consumer electronics. So these are the four categories that I cover for Europe. Okay, and the business model. So there are tons of business models that we have launched, especially recently, and we have all these 4 brands that want to enter China, right? And then one last role that I decided to take on is basically to become a globalization SOP builder. So what does that mean? It's like over time I realized that there's a huge gap between the employees working in Alibaba Group at the headquarters in Hangzhou and those who are based overseas. So I thought that, okay, there are several ways to deal with this. The number one is to build SOPs. The second one is to just have or hire people who are understanding of the culture. But then you can't hire, you can't get a few thousand people to come to Hangzhou in order to do that. So you have to build SOPs. So I built all the SOPs for globalization, and that's what gave me the scoring that I mentioned to you earlier. Then moving forward, so the KPIs, measures of success. The number one is, of course, the number of stores that we open for brands, right? So that's a hard number. There's also brand survival rate. So of course you have to bring in as many brands as possible, but they have to survive, right? It's also how much sales, right, each category brings in, because for example, in my category of consumer electronics, we need to bring in a lot of sales, right? So that's the turnover for the category. We need to make sure that we bring the right brands that will generate the right amount of sales. And then, of course, the team is efficiency based on my last point that I mentioned earlier. Then the second bit, which is probably the most interesting one, is Rwanda, or sort of like my work in EWTP. So the first part was basically to look into the business. So how did this come to me? It was in June last year. So my boss comes to me and is like, hey Dean, we have this project. Jack really wants somebody from Tmall to handle it. And you're probably the only foreigner in Tmall today that is capable of handling the project, but also that has the connection in order to do this. So I said, okay, that's perfect, because I really like that type of initiative to actually be able to reconnect back to my roots, right? So I was given this project. It was basically a blank piece of paper. And the project EWTP, so you don't know what EWTP stands for, right? It stands for Electronic World Trade Platform. So Electronic World Trade Platform is an initiative that is equivalent to the Belt One Belt, One Road initiative by the Chinese government. Except that this time it's from Alibaba, which is trying to actually build the entire ecosystem globally in order to enable all the businesses to do business globally as well. So infrastructures, like I mentioned to you earlier, payment, logistics, warehousing, but also at policy level, working with governments, working with UN, for example, or UNCTAD, in order to make sure that the policies are all there to support those, right? So this is the definition of EWTP, or what it stands for. My role was basically to build or to lead one of the three businesses that are in the EWTP. The first one is related to trade. So trade, that was my responsibility. The second one is tourism. So I heard somebody about tourism, I'll tell you more about this. And then the last one is everything that's related to teaching, or kind of like training, okay? Training teachers, training students to understand what it took for Alibaba in order to get where it is, in order for them to then take that experience or that knowledge and build their own ecosystem in Africa. So I was in charge of trade. And trade, I looked at...
Sorry, I just missed that. What did you say about the students?
Yeah, so training teachers and students to acquire sufficient knowledge about like digital economy, logistics, payments, etc., so they can build their own businesses in the future in their own country, leveraging the experience that we have shared to them, right? So these are the three components, and I was in charge of one, and still am. So this whole EWTP Rwanda, I'm the lead for trade. Basically, when I looked at the business, I said, okay, what can we import from Rwanda? And my very first guess was coffee. But then I worked with the government, so I have a list of different industries or categories, like we call them in Alibaba, different categories, including fashion, handcrafts, food, etc. But I said, the Chinese consumers are not going to buy any of that. They will go for coffee, because coffee, or specialty coffee, I'm not talking about general coffee that we drink, instant coffee, right? Specialty coffee is a very fast-growing subcategory of coffee in China. So that's what I was focusing on, okay? And we did, yeah, sorry.
May I ask why they chose Rwanda?
Exactly. Okay. All right, so January 2018. January 2018, Jack went to Davos, okay? And he met the president, Paul Kagame. And they had a talk, because Paul Kagame is basically trying to build his country to become the next Singapore of Africa. So the country Rwanda is a very interesting country, because it's a landlocked country, right? Meaning that it's surrounded by other countries, not close to the sea, therefore cannot be an export country, or kind of like a very good strategic place for maritime trade. And it's just very small. It's got probably 11 million people, right? And it comes with a very heavy history of genocide, right? So you have a country like this, and then of course Paul Kagame wanting to make his country become the Singapore of Africa. When he met Jack, it was like, okay, this is what I want to do for my country. And Jack, he said, this is what I'm willing to do in order to make you sort of, to make this happen. So
added to the fact that it's the least corrupt country in Africa.
Exactly.
And the highest economic growth in the last 15
Yes.
years and everything else.
So a few facts about Rwanda. We actually were extremely impressed with. Number one, it's the number one place for business in Africa. Not a lot of people know it, but it's the number one place for business. The second one is the safest country in Africa, right? So we went there, and even myself, like I had no idea. I didn't know Rwanda, or I didn't know anything. I read a little bit, but I was like, that's not enough. I need to be there. Clean as hell. Yeah. The country uses no plastic. There are no trash cans. There's nothing on the street. People are civilized, and they're still remembering their history. They're still very humble about it. When you talk to them about it, they're very open. And you will see on the streets of Rwanda sometimes, you will see also plaques that says, never again, right? History will never repeat itself. So the country is on that rebirth, right? And that rebirth is basically fueled by that sort of hunger to want to do more on the digital economy. So that alliance was perfect, came at the right time. So January 2018, and I flew to Rwanda in July 2018 for the first time with my team. That's when we met with different people, and then we started like looking into making this a business. So that's how I got involved into the whole thing. So moving forward, I basically decided to start with coffee. So my role was basically to build the business on one hand, and then be the sort of like executor and strategic mind behind it, right? So it took a lot of time, a lot of energy on top of my existing job. but it was all worth it, and I'll share you why. So, like I told you, so we went to Rwanda in July 2018. Okay, went to July there. I went to Rwanda in July, and basically the entire business was from Rwanda. There was 0 sales of coffee in China, 0. The Chinese consumers don't know about Rwanda, let alone that Rwanda is selling coffee. So the challenges were just too many, right? And then add to the fact that it's an African country, and we know sometimes Chinese people have a certain prejudice about African countries, right? It's sickness, it's war, it's this, it's that. So we had tons of barriers to basically start trying to take down. So the very first one that I set for the marketing team, and by the way, I worked with a company called Juhuasuan, which is the equivalent of a Groupon. So it's basically our flash sales company, right? Juhuasuan. Juhuasuan is the flash sale company, the biggest one in China. And what we do there is basically we group different products in different categories and sell them at a certain price to the consumer. That generates a lot of traffic. So that's the marketing company that I decided to start with. The first step was to look at how do we increase the awareness of Africa, of Rwanda, and its products. So a lot of investment went in. I got a budget of roughly 2.5 million RMB in order to do that, put the plan together and executed it. And these are some of the results. The very first one that I'm super proud of, there's a platform called Zhuhu in China. So it's a question and answer platform. Zhuhu. Anyway, so it's a question and answer. It's the equivalent of a Quora, for example, in the West, right? So people ask questions and they share experiences. In there are millions and millions of question and answers basically every day, right? And in order to get to the top, you have to have a very hot topic. We came in number 9 out of 25 listings on the first page, meaning that the topic about Africa, about Rwanda, and about coffee came in number 9. That's like something that we didn't expect, because we were expecting it to come like maybe in the millions, right? Because we didn't expect that people were actually going to be so interested about it. So of course, people were talking, they were asking questions, and people who lived in Africa, Chinese people who lived in Africa, also participated in the discussion. And you can see it in some of the numbers here. Close to 89 million people actually read the topics that were shared on Weibo. More than 20 million people were exposed to everything that was going on. So the whole, like I would say, the volume or the exposure that this campaign has built was close to 150 million exposed to the Rwandan and African content in China. Whether it was positive comment, negative comment, you had everything, but we don't care. We got Rwanda exposed, right? And then the second KPI, the second step was of course to sell the coffee, right? We have acquired risk, so we bought coffee from 3 brands in Rwanda, and then we had to basically sell them. But we had to make it in a way that was basically going to like create some explosion. We call this Baoguan in Chinese. Baoguan means like, okay, this product has to become a best-selling product, right? Baoguan. So some very key numbers, and I will focus probably only on this one. We got the volume of Rwandan coffee to increase by 700%. Of course, that was close to 0 before, so that's easy to sell some, right? But in the whole category, if you look at an entire store like Ili, for example, when they launch a new product, their increase in terms of sale is only 20%. We got this to increase by 700%. So what does that mean when you look at the operations in Alibaba Group? It means that all the buyers in Alibaba Group, as well as the category managers who manage their own coffee category, will be interested into the coffee just by this number. So in Alibaba, it's really like fight for your resources, right? You want to get help from somebody, you got to prove that you actually deserve that help. This number only gave me all the help that I needed for the future. Okay? So this is, any questions? Okay, and another thing also is, I put this in purple on top. So one of the 3 sellers actually, just because we're not trying only to sell coffee from Rwanda, but we're also trying to benefit the country in terms of economic growth and all this stuff, right? So one of the coffee sellers got offered 20% of equity within his company. He's been there for almost, I think it was 11 years? Yeah, 11 years he was working there. No equity before that, but because of the work that he had provided for Alibaba, he was offered 20% equity in his company. And now he's like feeding his family and he's like doing extremely well and growing his business, not only in his own country, but also selling to neighboring countries and now overseas too. So it's like one of those stories that, you know, you build a project, you don't think that anything's gonna happen, but then you look at the numbers and you're like, wow, we have done something, right? Okay. The second one was that I organized also a visit by the Rwandan ambassador to China and to Rwanda in China. So I told him, come to Shanghai, we have an event with a company called Tmall Discovery. So Tmall Discovery is basically a platform that the users in China use in order to discover new stuff about global, what's happening in the West, about different stuff and new products to discover. So I said, come. We've built a whole marketing event with Peet's Coffee. So Peet's Coffee today is basically the #1 offline chain for coffee in China. So you go to anywhere, you will see Peet's Coffee. And so we created an event there that generated a lot of buzz. And again, the numbers speak for themselves. So it's just in the millions. It's in tens of millions of people who saw everything. And it's just really, really great. So on that day, the sales that we had sort of like seen increased by 250% just on that day, thanks to that event. So that was really, really good and beneficial to the brands. And I only had 5,000 RMB investment, budget to do that. So in terms of like return on investment, we were extremely happy, okay? Third one was another thing that I'll talk to you guys as if you're all Africans. We all know we are all very lazy, right? In general, like we're lazy people most of the time, or at least that's what we're known for. So when I approached the Rwandan brands, or coffee brands, and even the government, I said, we're going to work really hard. We're going to work the Chinese way. They're like, oh, it's okay, we'll support. No. Nah, that's totally wrong. I was working from 6 a.m. to 11 p.m. sometimes for at least 6 months. And that was extremely, extremely hard because I had to do my work in Hangzhou, but I had to also support the Rwandan brands because some of them actually don't even know how to use Excel. They have to fill in documents for me in Excel so I can provide to my teams. So I had to do all that work as well. That really, really sort of like low work in order to help them to sell to us. So what happened then is that I realized that actually they were not going to be, or to have that state of mind to really say, Alibaba has done all these campaigns before. It's increasing our visibility as a country and as brands in the market. We're going to leverage that in order to expand into the market as well. We're not only going to look at Alibaba as our only channel to enter China, but we'll look at Kaola, we'll look at Jingdong, we'll look at all the other potential distributors that we can talk to in order to make that happen. But they didn't have that sort of thinking. They were like, we have Alibaba, that's enough, right? And I said, that's not enough. So I had two choices. One was to confront them that, guys, you're too lazy. You really need to start thinking. But if I waited for them to start thinking, then nothing would have happened. So what I did was I created an event in January this year. That event was basically to host as many Rwandan coffee brands into our headquarters. There were 45 of them that came, roughly 100 people. I hosted also the government from Rwanda to come in. But on the other hand, I also hosted all the key leaders in the B2C platform and the B2B platform of Alibaba, as well as all the major distributors of coffee in China, and all the, what we call the TPs, or Tmall partners that operate stores onto our platforms. So it was a total event of roughly 250 people that lasted for 3 days. The schedule that I have put was basically the first days was about learning. So the Rwandan companies and the government was going to learn about, number one, what is the China digital economy? How does it work? As well as learning on the second day about the distributors' ecosystem and the different companies that operate in the coffee industry. The last day was matchmaking. So 2 days of learning and then the last day of business development for them. Extremely successful. Why was it successful? Because number one, it was an event that made that matchmaking possible between some of the top distributors in China to Rwandan coffee brands that actually were longing for exposure in China. And they had all these deals being made on the spot, and now they're still continuing. So that event has brought not only business, but it has brought them knowledge, and I made that in January. And then I told to the government, I said, you need to now think about the development of Rwandan coffee in China. You don't need to think about just the brands, but the coffee industry in China. They're still lazy, so I'm still pushing that. Still today. That's me being me. Okay. So I work for, of course, Alibaba, but then if I want to think about Africa, because that's, originally that's where I'm from, okay. I have to think about, do I look after my KPIs, or do I look after the people interest, what we're trying to achieve there? I prefer the second one. So I told them, you need to look after everything. So I spoke to the embassy of Rwanda in Beijing, and I told them, you need to do your work. So they started listing all the different channels that were available, including attending, for example, coffee fairs in China, in Guangzhou, in Shanghai, etc. So now they're putting all that plan together, and I'm pushing them to give it to me by the end of this month. So all of this stuff is basically pushing them to, you have a hard deadline. If ever you don't do your work, nobody is going to want to buy more coffee from you. And you will basically waste all the efforts and money that has been invested in the past. Okay? So this event was successful for various reasons. For those that I told you, business was made, knowledge was acquired, and they look at the brighter future now. And most of these companies now are actually coming very heavily into China. Okay? Okay, the last one, it's loaded.
We
The
have
video?
time. You have
Okay.
all your time.
Okay, cool.
Don't worry.
Okay. So this made me proud. Actually, I've put two things that made me proud this week. The very first one was that CNN asked to come and air about what we did in Rwanda for its coffee industry. The two other segments that I told you about, BTB, trade and tourism, it didn't go as planned. For the shoes from Algeria are selling extremely well on Taobao. What does that mean? That means if you're an African supplier of open shoes and you can bring competition to those Algerian companies, good, do it. Because there is one that's like close to 100% market share, right? So people will look for choice. If they're given choices, maybe at cheaper price, great, do it. But then you have to remember, right? For me, when I'm in Alibaba, I'm lucky because I look at the Taobao data, which is half of the country's population. But there's another half that I don't cover, which is, for me, it's covered by research companies or consulting firms. So I get that other half from those consulting firms, right? And then another thing is, because we have teams overseas, I also ask them for their insights into what are the trendy products in those local countries. And then I match it with the consumption data that I have on Taobao and in the market. Right? So being in China for such a long time, of course, it helps because you kind of have a sense of what might work, just like you do. But then you need to link all those intuitional facts to actual reality on the market, which is backed by data. If your product is just totally inexistent and Chinese people have no exposure to it, you just know you have to take a bet. 2,000 RMB is not enough to invest. You probably have to invest 200 million RMB because you need to break that brand awareness gap that there is in the market, right? But then if your product is already very well sold and you're just trying to compete in that field, right? What you will face is a competition at multiple levels, including one is on the supply chain, right? So supply chain, how are you going to beat your competitor in terms of maybe reception time of that product from making it sort of like being received by a consumer in 3 days instead of 4? How are you going to compete in margin? What are the promotions that you're going to make, right? How much are you going to take off your profit? So all those are in supply chain, logistic, P&L, you have to look into. You compete into a Red Sea, you have to compete at every single value chain, every single steps of the value chain, including especially supply chain, right? So that's extremely important. When you look at e-commerce, which is almost everything today, or like new retail, which is O and O, O to O, right? When you look at that, if you compete in the Red Sea, you compete in supply chain. If you compete in the Blue Sea, you have to have money.
Just have one minute. I'm sorry. No, when you're talking, I have a lot of things. Because I think to what he said and your response to him and also what you added, I found it very, I don't know, it's very impactful. And I just thought about something because when you're talking about this project you had in Rwanda, you had about 2.5 million cash. But actually what we're not counting, and which I think should be valued, is the fact that you work in this kind of company, the data you got, the kind of data you got, it's not accessible to everybody. So how much would you value, like, maybe it's a very abstract question, but how much value would you give to the fact that you are Alibaba during this project that added?
I would say 0. I'll give you a very clear answer why. 0.
Even for the business intelligence
what did I say earlier? I didn't know coffee industry. I chose coffee because I saw consumer reports online
Yeah.
that instant coffee was increasing at decreasing rate. Specialty coffee was increasing at increasing rate. The growth of the consumption of specialty coffee, right? I saw that online, now on Taobao. And the second thing is that I saw that there was not enough supply of specialty coffee in China. All right, I'm lucky enough that I have a business unit I have to convince, because I told you, we fight for resources. I have to convince them that they have to buy specialty coffee from a country that's not known, right? They have to buy specialty coffee. So for me, it's actually even harder to be in Alibaba than being outside. Let's consider you're outside. If I were an entrepreneur doing coffee business and trying to develop it in China, how would I have done it? I have access to the data which is provided for free in the internet. I know specialty coffee is the future of the coffee industry, okay? I want to buy the best specialty coffees in the world. What are going to be my challenges? The first one is, I don't have sales channels. Who can I go and see in China that is going to help me to sell that coffee? Or maybe, how am I going to position myself in order to be that representative of some coffee, maybe conglomerate, and then represent it to the Chinese distributors, for example? Because if you show them the data, you tell them, hey, specialty coffee is the future. Why aren't you buying it? Here are the data. Here are the facts that you can find online on Chinese and foreign websites. You tell them this, they will be more likely to buy. Why? Because the consumers are showing that they are actually already looking for these products. They're not only looking, but some of them are actually buying specialty coffee. And if you look at the specialty coffee industry, it's actually been a very booming industry for the past 4 years now. So we came in, I would say, even too late.
Okay.
Right? So you have to look at all these things. So how do you actually approach the market? It's based on you. But I was in Alibaba, of course, that's a luck that I have, because I can do things on a big scale. But actually for a small entrepreneur, it's actually also quite easy to look at what the consumption trends are and then look at the supply. If it's lacking, you bring it and you find the right partners to sell forward. Number one, you'll be extremely involved in Europe. But number two, when the group's ready, you'll be potentially the CEO for Africa, or actually looking at the business of Alibaba Group in Africa. So right now what's happening is that the company is looking into investing into several companies, right? But remember those 4 foundations I mentioned to you, the 3 foundations, big data, logistics, and payments? So these are the key investment opportunities that you need to look into right now in Africa, right? So that's what I'm going to look into as well. If ever one day I become the country or continent leader for Africa, I'll be like extremely paying very strong attention to those 3 foundations I mentioned to you about, making sure the ecosystem is ready. Because if it's missing one, there's not going to be any global trade. Even intra-continent trade is not going to happen.
And assuming that Tencent is also involved in some of those big data, and then they're owned by at least 30% by a South African company, and they are looking to get into Africa, from what I've heard. Do you guys kind of like check how would the competition, go?
Competition is good, right?
Yeah, Tencent and Alibaba.
Competition is good because it forces you to do better than the other, right? So I would say that Tencent is looking into several areas that we are already looking into. So based on the report that I received by the investment teams, basically those 3 areas that we look into, they're also doing the same. But then another one is basically transportation. So everything that is sort of enabling easy transportation, or facilitating transportation across countries, because today we know the major challenge in Africa is basically transportation and logistics, right? So if you've got today, you have a few players who are focusing on this today. So that's a major one that everyone's looking into.
So because recently DHL it started a shop that would be servicing African customers with European goods. So what's your take on that? Have you also tried to do it from a China perspective, that these guys have got the logistics already, and then try to bring Taobao to them? What's your take on that?
It's a very good and very important question, because basically this one defines the strategy of the group, right? So one of the key strategies of the group is globalization. So if you look at those companies that are in that globalization initiative, you have AliExpress. So AliExpress is basically taking those Chinese goods overseas. And we have now teams in France, in Russia, and in Spain. Okay, but these two last countries, Spain and France, actually just was the teams were established just end of last year and beginning of this year for France. So it's very recent. And now there is an actual mandate to enable African consumers to shop on AliExpress because they are already shopping on AliExpress, but there is just such a potential that we need to start pushing it. So then the actual trade flux, how it's going to go, it's going to be from Africa to China, but at the same time from China to Africa. So now if you look at another thing, it's like last November, the Chinese government has created what we call the Import Expo in Shanghai, right? The CIIE. And so this Import Expo is the first one that China has made in order to announce to the whole world, we are no longer an export country, we're now an import country. In this, the President Xi Jinping has made a promise to the whole world that by 2023, the country will import for $10 trillion worth of services and for $1.8 trillion worth of goods. Alibaba, the CEO, has made another promise on stage, which is that Alibaba will import for more than $200 billion worth of goods by 2023. So if you look at all these numbers and timelines, you understand that basically the trade war that's taking place against the US is actually pushing all the Chinese companies that are doing cross-border e-commerce to look into the different regions, such as Southeast Asia, India, Latin America, Middle East, Africa, because they need to achieve those targets, right? So they will look into how to make it happen from those regions.
What an amazing time to get trained.
All right.
Thank you, guys.
I think that's a very great point that she made. If you have your own idea, tomorrow you'll be seeing a speaker. We're all here to learn.
If you feel like it's not bringing you any happiness, in the end it's like your own life, and then you have to just kind of follow where your intuition is guiding you.